As things continue to get more tense in different parts of the world, one thing that a lot of people are concerned about is an EMP or an electromagnetic pulse. And if one were to happen, it would be absolutely devastating. While most people focus on the damage one would cause to our power grid and other parts of the infrastructure that makes modern life possible, some of the worst consequences would result from the human reaction to such an event. Confusion, fear, and desperation will cause people to do things that they wouldn't even consider doing during normal times, and the best way to deal with those folks, and also to prevent ourselves from becoming part of the problem, is to plan ahead for these kinds of situations. So today we're going to talk about things to do in the hours and days following an EMP to keep ourselves and our loved ones as safe as possible. And the first thing that you want to do is determine if an EMP actually took place. If you're at home and the power goes out, it could be any number of things. So start by looking down at your cell phone. While some believe that a cell phone could possibly survive an EMP, if the lights go out and you look down and your phone has just suddenly stopped working at the exact same time, then there's a good chance that it was an EMP. The next thing that you need to do is to stay as calm as possible. Most people really aren't all that familiar with the effects of an EMP, and those that are, a lot of them are probably going to fall victim to normalcy bias. So while everybody else is looking around all confused, trying to figure out what's going on, that's going to be your time to get a head start on what needs to be done. And the next thing that you need to do is reach a safe place. Most other videos and lists that go over this topic say that you need to get home as quickly as possible, and that's good advice for most people. Home is probably where you have the vast majority of your supplies, and even if you don't plan on staying there if things get really bad, you'll probably need to at least stop by to pick up some things. Then there's a good chance that your home's going to be the meetup point for various members of your family. However, there is a chance that an EMP could be the result of a nearby nuclear explosion or may happen right before nuclear ground strikes. Like I mentioned in a previous video, this will limit a country's ability to respond to that kind of strike, increasing the amount of damage that it causes. And if this were the case, you really don't want to be caught outside because that's the absolute worst place to be when a nuke goes off. So if you're in a major city or near a military base, you may want to shelter in place at least for a little while. Lower underground levels of buildings and parking garages could be a good option due to the cover that they provide. However, I wouldn't wait more than 30 minutes to an hour because remember, time will be ticking before widespread panic starts to kick in. And y'all, I know that this is a difficult decision to make because you want to get home as quickly as possible, but at the same time, you don't want to get vaporized because, well, there's no coming back from that. And you also don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're buried underneath a bunch of rubble. So my advice would be if you live in a major city or near some sort of sensitive target area, then move. But if you can't do that, and I know that's the case for a lot of people because there's probably very good reasons why you live where you do, then just try to remain as situationally aware as possible. Be aware of events that involve Russia and NATO, then also China and Taiwan, and also the Middle East. Because chances are, even as bad as those things are right now, there's a very good chance that they will get a lot worse before something as drastic as an EMP happens, because really there's no other way to look at one of those than as a clear declaration of war. But one thing that I've heard in other videos like this that I disagree with is spending cash on supplies right after an EMP. Now, if you're on your way home and you notice that there's a little mom and pop shop that's still open and they're taking cash, then yeah, go ahead, drop in there, pick up some things. But the bottom line is, most stores, when the computers stop working, they're going to stop selling stuff. Then also, once people figure out what's going on, those kind of businesses are just going to devolve into total madness. Another important part of getting home is having a plan for each member of your family. All adults and older kids in your family should know the telltale signs of an EMP and what they need to do if one happens. That includes how to leave wherever they may be at, whether it's their job or school, which should probably be as quietly and discreetly as possible, not make a big announcement out of it, and then also where to meet up with other family members. And the other big part of that is knowing who will be responsible for picking up younger children and where to go after they do that. Then, after you get home, you need to be prepared to deal with potential fires. Power lines will act as gigantic antenna, which will absorb large amounts of energy from an EMP, and very few things attached to them are designed to handle that kind of power surge. Small transformers on utility poles and larger ones at substations will blow out, and there's a good chance that devices connected to the grid in your home could overload as well. During the Carrington event in 1859, a massive solar flare caused an EMP that caused telegraph wires to catch on fire, which resulted in numerous wildfires. And some switchboard operators were even shocked as they were sitting at their station working. There's no reason to think that modern electrical infrastructure wouldn't suffer similar damage, and that'd be very problematic, especially during the summer months in areas already prone to wildfires. The best way to deal with fires at your home is to pick up some good quality fire extinguishers ahead of time, and also go ahead and turn off the gas supply to your home so that you won't have that running through your system. After you get home and make sure that everything's safe, avoid the temptation to remove protected electronics from Faraday cages or Faraday bags. It's possible that multiple electromagnetic pulses would be used, and the last thing that you want to do is go through all of that trouble to protect your devices only to have them fried the first time that you try to use them. So my recommendation is to have a sacrificial radio that you can keep protected separate from other essential devices. In this Faraday bag, I have a small ham radio that I can take out to monitor ham, FM, and NOAA weather frequencies. This will allow me to get any information that I can from any source that happened to survive an EMP without having to risk damage to other essential devices like my solar generator. Radios like that are only around $25 each, so it's something that you can reasonably pick up multiples of. And while you don't want to take out your protected devices, it doesn't hurt to go ahead and check out devices that were out when an EMP happened, because there's a small chance that those devices, or at least some of them, could have survived. The same goes for vehicles, especially those stored in enclosed metal garages. However, if your vehicle did survive, you only want to use those if you absolutely have to, because it'll draw a ton of attention to you. The next thing you should do after an EMP is gather as much last-ditch water storage as possible, and one of the best ways to get a ton of water with very little effort is to fill up your bathtub. You could go ahead and pick up something like an Aquapod kit or water bob for this purpose. However, any water that you collect in those, even though that container is safe and clean, you probably still want to go ahead and boil that water just to be on the safe side. Although the water stored in towers should be clean, if water treatment facilities go offline, it's always best to err on the side of caution, especially if the pressure in the system has already started to drop. In addition to your bathtub, also fill up any larger containers that you may have in your kitchen. Large pots and pitchers can be used, and you may also want to fill up non-food safe containers like buckets. This water can be used for cleaning and other tasks where you don't need 100% potable water, but I would avoid filling up any containers that were used to hold things like dangerous chemicals. Then, even if you haven't installed a rainwater harvesting system into your home, there are easy ways to set one up on the fly. Setting containers like plastic totes or kiddie pools out in your yard when it's raining will help you gather some, but you can increase the amount of water that you collect by using a tarp or something else to channel rain into them. You can also hang towels out, let them soak up water, and then wring them into a container. The next thing you should do after an EMP is implement a food storage strategy. This includes which foods you'll consume first, and then also how you'll ration your supplies to help them last as long as possible. Food in your fridge will spoil first, so this should be eaten right away, provided you can get to it within 3 hours of the power going out. That's especially important for things like milk, but you may be able to stretch that time out a little bit with vegetables that are still whole and don't show any signs of spoilage. After you eat the food in your fridge, then move on to the stuff in your freezer. As a general rule, food in a full freezer should last around 48 hours, but that time is going to diminish drastically the first time that you open that up, so don't open it until you really need to. Also, go ahead and eat any other dry goods that haven't been packaged for long-term storage. This can include rice, beans, and flour that you have in your pantry, or things like crackers or jars of peanut butter that you've already opened. If you have canning supplies, then you may want to preserve as much food as possible with those. That'd be a very good way to use a camp stove and any small amounts of fuel that you have on hand. Just be careful to avoid drawing attention to yourself while you're doing that, because that could be a security concern, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But if you know what you're doing and you can do it safely, then you may be able to preserve at least some of your meat, fruits and vegetables. Then, after you've consumed your perishables, move on to your long-term food storage. I'd recommend saving freeze-dried foods and canned goods for situations where properly cooking foods like beans and rice may not be possible. That could be due to things like weather or security concerns. Now would also be a good time to start seeds for your garden if you haven't already done so. Knowing which crops grow in the different seasons will help you have at least some fresh food throughout the year. But to remain safe, you do want to plant your garden somewhere that it's not going to be easily seen. For meat, you can set up traps and snares for small animals. Just be careful when consuming animals that have lived in urban areas, since there's no telling what they've eaten. Fishing would be a good option if you live near a body of water, and while you should try to have as much food stored as possible, being able to supplement that as you go on will help you make your food storage last longer, and you can also save it for situations where you can't get food by any other means. And once you figure out a game plan for your food and water, then organize your other supplies, making sure that you know what you have and where it's located. This can include survival gear along with essential supplies like medications. Come up with a plan for how you'll ration finite resources like fuel and batteries. For batteries, I'd recommend saving those for security-related preps like flashlights, optics, and motion sensors. While some of those may be destroyed by an EMP, if you're lucky and some of them aren't, then only use those when you absolutely have to. Also take an inventory of your bug out bag and other kits, and also stage any preps that you'd want to take with you if you needed to bug out. While bugging in is almost always the safer option, there could be situations where staying put could endanger you and your family. Maybe there's roving gangs sacking every house that they can find, or some big fire breaks out and there's no way to control it. Having supplies ready to go at a moment's notice just gives you options if you need to make that decision. The next thing you need to consider after an EMP is security, and this will be really important, especially after people figure out that the lights aren't coming back. The biggest focus here tends to be on firearms and ammo, and while yes, those are definitely important, you also want to avoid putting yourself in a situation where you may have to use those. If you took steps to protect lights and power sources, avoid letting other people know that you have them. Avoid running loud equipment like gas generators, and if you have a solar generator, try to set it up somewhere that people won't be able to see it as easily, like a fenced-in backyard. If you're somebody like me who has a very sunny front yard but a bunch of trees in your backyard, it may be worth sacrificing a little bit of energy for increased safety, or you could just go ahead and trim those trees back. Also be careful how and when you use LED lanterns and flashlights. If the rest of your neighborhood is just pitch black and your house is the only one with a little sliver of light coming out through the window, then you're going to stick out, and people are probably going to assume that since you have backup lighting, you may have other things that they could use as well. Using blackout curtains is a good first option, but if things get really bad, you may want to go ahead and just hang up blankets, tape the sides, because that'll do a much better job of preventing light from leaking out. Another thing you should think of when it comes to security is cooking. While you can probably get away with using your gas or charcoal grill to cook the stuff in your fridge on day one, I wouldn't do it much beyond that. Charcoal in particular produces a very distinct odor and a lot of smoke, both of which will easily travel beyond your yard. So my advice is to try to cook indoors whenever possible. Butane stoves and alcohol stoves are generally considered safe for indoor use, so I'd stock up on plenty of fuel for those to at least get you through the first few weeks or the first month after the event. Then, after those fuel supplies run out, you'll need to rely on natural materials. Rocket stoves are a good option for this since they don't produce much smoke, but just remember that whatever you're cooking could produce smoke or an odor. Using them to boil water, which you could use to rehydrate foods, would be a good option since that's probably going to produce the least amount of smoke or smell. This would be easiest with freeze-dried foods since they don't take long to reconstitute, but you could also pour that water into something like a thermos and then add your beans and rice to that. The thermos should retain that heat long enough to cook those. Also, do whatever you can to improve the physical security of your home. Make sure that gates leading into your yard are locked and battery-operated motion sensors can be protected in a Faraday cage and then installed after an EMP takes place. Then other things like door reinforcement kits and barricade brackets can make doors harder to kick in. The next thing you should do after an EMP is implement your waste disposal and hygiene plan. And the most important part of this is going to be how you're going to deal with human waste. For a lot of folks, digging a large hole in your yard is probably going to be the best option. You could use something like a camp toilet in the house and then transfer that waste outside and bury it. If you have a larger piece of property, then you can build a dedicated latrine. Just make sure that it's far away from water sources and not so deep that it comes close to the water table level. Another thing that you should do is block the main drain line that takes wastewater away from your home. While that's something that you definitely don't want blocked while things are up and running, when water treatment facilities and sewage facilities go offline for a long enough period of time, then that stuff is going to start to back up, and when the doo-doo starts flowing freely all over your house, then really you can't live there anymore. And for household waste, digging a pit is a good way to deal with that. Also, it's probably better than burning it because of harmful fumes. And really, burying trash is how we dispose of things now anyways, in things like landfills. However, like with latrines and poo-poo pits, make sure that it's far away from your house, it's far away from water sources, and it's not dug so deep that it goes below the water table level. Then another important part of hygiene is dealing with pests like insects and rodents. Pesticides can work well for bugs, but be very careful with rat poison since it can easily kill other things as well. That can include pets, kids, and it can even contaminate animals that you may want to eat for food. And y'all, you never know where you're going to be when an EMP or some other major event takes place. And one of the best ways to deal with that is by putting together a good everyday carry or get home bag. You can see what I keep in mind by clicking here, or if you want to see preps that you need to shelter in place, then click here. And y'all, in the next few weeks or next month or so, keep your eyes out for a big announcement that I have coming y'all's way. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.